I never thought my own flesh and blood could betray me so completely. When my daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "You'll die alone in a nursing home," before evicting me from my own home, something inside me broke forever. But what she didn't know was that I had a secret fund, money I'd been saving for her future, that would soon change both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but this isn't a story about revenge. It's about finding family in the most unexpected places, about second chances when all hope seems lost, and about the devastating secrets that can destroy everything we thought we knew. When I used her college fund to buy that weathered beach cottage, I never expected to discover a connection that would shake the foundation of my world, or that my daughter would return with a desperate plea that would force me to make the most difficult choice of my life. Follow our channel for more heartbreaking true stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, forgiveness, and what we owe to those who hurt us the most. Like and comment to let us know where you're watching from, and share your own stories of family betrayal and unexpected redemption. I didn't die that day, but something inside me did. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind where autumn tries to pretend it's still summer. I remember because the calendar on my refrigerator showed Margaret's doctor appointment scheduled for that day. Margaret, my wife of 43 years, had been gone for 16 months, but I still wrote her appointments down. Old habits die harder than people, I suppose. The kettle was whistling when Jenna walked in. My daughter, my only child. I'd always been able to read her moods from the way she closed the front door. A gentle push meant she was tired. A quick snap meant she was in a hurry. But that day, that Tuesday that changed everything, she slammed it so hard the framed photo of our family trip to Yellowstone tilted crooked on the wall. "Dad?" she said, but it wasn't the way a daughter says that word. It was cold, clinical, like I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. I smiled anyway. "Hey, sweetheart, I just made some tea. We need to talk about your situation." My situation. As if aging was a disease I'd contracted through carelessness. I poured hot water over the tea bag, watching it bleed amber into the cup. "What situation is that?" She tossed her designer purse onto the counter, the same counter where I'd taught her to make Christmas cookies when she was 7. "You can't keep living here alone, it's not safe, you're getting older." At 68, I wasn't exactly ancient. Still drove myself to the grocery store. Still played my accordion at the community center on Thursdays. Still remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every important date. "I'm doing just fine, Jenna." Her eyes narrowed, and suddenly I was looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "No, you're not. You forgot to take your blood pressure medication twice last week." "How would you know that?" "You haven't been here in 3 weeks." "Because I checked, Dad. I have to check everything because you're becoming a burden." The word landed like a slap. Burden. Is that what 40 years of bedtime stories, college tuition payments, and unconditional love amounts to in the end? A burden? I set my tea down carefully, afraid my trembling hands would betray me. "I've never asked you for anything, Jenna." She laughed then, a sharp, ugly sound that didn't belong in our kitchen. "Are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain this house? What it costs to keep checking on you? I have my own life, Dad. I have my career, my relationship with Mark. I can't keep putting everything on hold because you refuse to accept reality." I looked around at the home I'd built with Margaret, the home where we'd raised Jenna, the mortgage I'd paid off by working double shifts at the plant for 15 years. "This is my house," I said quietly. That's when I saw it, the look, that terrible smile spreading across her face like a crack in porcelain. "Actually, it's not anymore." She pulled out a folder from her purse and slid it across the counter. "You signed it over to me last year, remember? When you were organizing your affairs." I remembered the papers. I remembered signing them, but I'd thought they were for after I was gone, not while I was still very much alive. "You can't just—" "I can, and I am." Her voice hardened. "You're a burden. Nobody wants to take care of a useless old man. You'll end up alone in a nursing home, rotting away with all the others." Then with a cold smile she added, "By the way, the house is already in my name. Good luck finding somewhere to sleep tonight." In that moment, the teacup in my hand might as well have been my heart. Fragile, hot to the touch, and suddenly too heavy to hold. This wasn't just cruelty. This was betrayal of the deepest kind. I'd sold my prized Chevy when she broke her leg in college, so she wouldn't have to drop out. I'd given up a promotion that would have required relocation when Margaret got sick, so I could care for her. After Margaret died, I'd put every spare penny into a savings account labeled Jenna's Future in my checkbook. And now, she was throwing me away like crumpled paper. Where am I supposed to go? My voice sounded distant even to my own ears. There's a nice assisted living facility in Ridgewood. I've already spoken with them. She checked her watch. The Rolex I'd given her for her 30th birthday. They have an opening next week. Until then, there's a budget inn off Route 9. She was evicting me. My own daughter was evicting me from the home I'd built. Why? It was all I could manage to ask. Her eyes met mine and I saw nothing there. No remorse, no doubt. Not even anger. Just emptiness. Because it's time, Dad. Because you're in the way. She grabbed her purse. I'll come by tomorrow to help you pack essentials. Mark and I are planning to renovate once you're out. The front door closed behind her with the same finality as a coffin lid. That night, sitting alone on a park bench because I couldn't bear the thought of sleeping in a motel while my life was being erased, I made the quietest, most definitive decision of my life. I would disappear, not die, not beg, not fight in courts against my own flesh and blood. Simply vanish from the life that no longer wanted me. In my pocket was a bank card connected to an account Jenna knew nothing about. The real college fund I'd been building for her, over $200,000 saved over decades of small sacrifices. Money for a future she'd just forfeited. As the streetlights flickered on and the evening chill settled around my shoulders, I realized that sometimes being buried alive gives you one advantage. No one expects you to climb out and walk away. But that's exactly what I intended to do. That first night of homelessness aged me more than decades had. The park bench pressed hard ridges into my back, and the autumn air bit through my thin jacket. I hadn't planned on being evicted after all. Every passing car headlight made me flinch, wondering if it was Jenna coming to drag me to that assisted living facility. Not a home, a facility. Like I was equipment to be stored away. Morning came with dew on my shoes and a decision cemented in my heart. At the bank, the teller's concerned glance told me I looked exactly like what I was, an old man who'd slept outdoors. But her expression changed when I presented my ID and asked to access my safe deposit box. "Of course, Mr. Harrison," she said, suddenly respectful. "Money does that, transforms you from pitiful to powerful in an instant." Inside the small private room, I opened the metal box I'd been maintaining for decades. There wasn't much. My birth certificate, Margaret's wedding ring that I couldn't bear to look at daily, a few treasury bonds, and the bank book for an account I'd never mentioned to anyone, not even Margaret. I'd opened it the day Jenna was born, feeding it with overtime pay, birthday checks from my parents, and the small inheritance from my uncle, the real college fund, as I thought of it, my gift for Jenna's future. But Jenna had chosen her future, and it didn't include me. I made 2 withdrawals that day. First, enough cash to live on for a few months. Second, a cashier's check large enough to buy a modest home outright. No mortgage, no paper trail leading back to the man I used to be. I took only what I could carry. 1 suitcase of clothes, my old accordion that Margaret had given me on our 10th anniversary, and a single photo, not of Jenna, but of my parents standing outside their first home. I left everything else behind, including the cell phone Jenna could track. The bus to Cape May, New Jersey took 3 hours and 47 minutes. I counted each one, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to coastal flatlands. Nobody looked twice at an old man traveling alone. Invisibility has its advantages. Cape May wasn't random. Margaret and I had spent our honeymoon there in 1976, staying at a bed and breakfast with peeling white paint and the most beautiful view of the Atlantic. The town had changed since then. More upscale shops, fewer fishermen, but the essential rhythm remained. The tide still came in twice daily, washing away footprints and bringing new shells to the shore. A clean slate. That's what I needed. The real estate agent seemed surprised when I said I wanted to buy, not rent, and even more surprised when I mentioned cash. "Usually takes a month to close," she warned. "What if I offer 10% above asking?" I countered. Her eyebrows shot up, and within 4 days I had keys to a weather-beaten cottage 3 blocks from the beach. It wasn't much, just a single-story structure with warped wooden floors and windows that stuck when the humidity rose. The previous owner had been a fisherman who died at sea, and his children wanted nothing to do with the place. Their loss. My salvation. That first night in my new home, I sat on the porch and listened to the distant crash of waves. The air smelled of salt, damp wood, and possibility. Inside, the cottage creaked and settled like it was getting used to my presence. I played my accordion, softly at first, then with growing confidence as the night deepened. No one to tell me to keep it down. No one to roll their eyes at the old-fashioned music. Just me and the sea breeze and Levian Rose floating into the darkness. I slept on a bare mattress that night, but it was the best rest I'd had in years. The next morning, I ventured into town for supplies. Cape May in the off-season felt like a different world. Quieter, less polished, more authentic. Most tourists were gone, leaving behind year-round residents who nodded hello without needing my life story. That's when I first saw her, Becca. She was unloading boxes from a battered pickup truck at the community center. Tall, perhaps in her late 30s, with hair the color of wet sand pulled back in a practical ponytail. A jagged scar ran from her left temple to her cheekbone, the kind that comes from something worse than an accident. "Need some help?" I asked, surprising myself. Since when did I offer assistance to strangers? She glanced up, sizing me up with eyes that had seen too much. "These are food deliveries for seniors," she explained, her voice lower than I expected. "You signing up or volunteering?" The question caught me off guard. "Neither, I guess. Just passing by." She nodded, then handed me a box anyway. "Well, since you're here, make yourself useful." I followed her inside, where a boy of about 8 sat quietly at a folding table, drawing with intense concentration. He didn't look up when we entered, but I noticed how his shoulders tensed at the sound of unfamiliar footsteps. "That's Jacob," Becca said quietly. "My son." Something about the boy's focused silence reminded me of myself as a child. I set the box down where Becca indicated, then approached the table slowly. "Nice drawing," I observed. It was a lighthouse, meticulously detailed. Jacob didn't respond or look up, but his pencil paused briefly. "My husband was the same way," Becca said when we stepped away. "Could tune out a hurricane when he was focused on something." There was a weight to how she said "was" that I recognized immediately. The grammar of grief. "I'm Richard," I said, offering my name for the first time in my new life. "Just moved into the Calloway place. Old man Calloway's cottage. Brave of you. Place has been empty for years." "It has good bones," I replied, surprised to find myself defending my shabby new home. Later that afternoon, Becca appeared at my door with a container of homemade soup and Jacob trailing silently behind her. "Seniors program," she explained with a half smile. "You qualify." I wanted to refuse. Pride dies hard, but the smell of chicken and rosemary weakened my resolve. "Thank you," I said instead, accepting the container. They turned to leave, but I called after them. "I have cookies. Store-bought, nothing special. But if you'd like to come in." Becca hesitated, then nodded. For a few minutes. Those few minutes stretched into an hour. I offered silence. No questions about her scar, no prying into her past, and in return, she offered simple companionship. Jacob eventually wandered to the corner where I'd propped my accordion. "Do you play?" I asked him. He shook his head without meeting my eyes. "Would you like to learn?" A small nod. And so it began. Our strange, fragile friendship built on soup deliveries and accordion lessons. Jacob never spoke much, but his eyes lost some of their wariness. Becca started staying longer, sometimes helping me fix things around the cottage. But there were secrets in that house beside the sea, and not just mine. Sometimes I'd catch Becca staring out at the ocean with a look of such raw fear that it made my heart ache. And once, when I got up for water in the night, I saw her through the window, burying something in my small backyard under the moonlight. Most disturbing of all, in the old oven that I never used, I discovered she'd hidden a stack of letters tied with twine. I didn't read them. Everyone deserves their privacy. But I noticed the prison address stamped on the envelope that had fallen loose. That night, as the wind rattled my windows and pushed sea spray against the glass, I realized something both terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't the only one in Cape May trying to disappear, and somehow that made me feel less alone than I had in years. A month into my new life, I decided it was time to face the paperwork. Not just any paperwork, the document that had defined my existence since Margaret's passing. Her death had thrust me into a world of legal forms and signatures, each one a painful reminder that a life together could be reduced to checked boxes and initialed pages. The day was unusually warm for late autumn. with sunlight streaming through my salt-crusted windows and casting long golden rectangles across my wooden floor. I called a taxi to take me to the Atlantic Trust Bank in the center of town. The driver, an elderly man named Walter with skin like tanned leather, didn't ask questions when I requested he wait. "Take your time," he said, folding his newspaper. "Meters running either way." The bank manager, a woman barely older than Jenna with perfect posture and a practiced smile, led me to a private room where my safe deposit box awaited. Unlike my old bank where I'd been Mr. Harrison, here I was a stranger, just another retiree with secrets to keep. "Will you need assistance with anything else today?" she asked, her tone suggesting she hoped the answer was no. "This will do," I replied, waiting for the click of the door before opening the metal box. Inside lay my life's final paperwork, the will I'd drafted after Margaret's funeral. Simple, straightforward, everything to Jenna. My house, my savings, even Margaret's jewelry that I couldn't bear to look at but couldn't bring myself to sell. At the time, it had seemed the natural order of things. Parents build, children inherit, the cycle continues. But now, the document felt like a mockery. I stared at Jenna's name, typed neatly in legal font, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. The daughter who'd thrown me away would get everything I'd worked for. The thought was unbearable. I folded the will carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Then I asked the bank manager for a recommendation. "A lawyer?" she repeated, slightly surprised. "For estate planning?" "Something like that," I said. 2 hours later, I sat across from Albert Thornton, a semi-retired attorney with wire-rimmed glasses and a diplomas from Princeton prominently displayed on his wall. He reminded me of an old tree, gnarled but sturdy, roots deep in the local soil. "So," he said after I'd explained my situation, or parts of it anyway, "you want to change your will?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. This wasn't just paperwork. This was rebirth. "Current beneficiary is your daughter," he noted, scanning the document. "And you want to remove her entirely?" "Yes." He peered at me over his glasses. "Family disputes can be complicated, Mr. Harrison. Often temporary. Are you certain?" "Some things can't be undone," I interrupted, the memory of Jenna's cold smile flashing through my mind. "Some words can't be taken back." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Who would you like to name instead?" The question hung in the air. Who indeed? I had no other family, no close friends left. Just a weathered cottage by the sea and— "Jacob," I said, surprising myself. "Jacob Mills." Albert's eyebrows rose. "The child? Becca's boy?" Of course he would know them. Cape May was small enough that everyone's business eventually became common knowledge. "Yes," I confirmed. "The cottage goes to him, and Becca gets a key, lifetime access." "Mr. Harrison," Albert said carefully, "this is quite unusual. You've only known them a short while." "I've known my daughter for 36 years, I replied. "Time isn't always the best measure of worth." We spent the next hour rewriting my will. It wasn't revenge. At least, that's what I told myself. It was justice, a redistribution of love to where it might actually be returned. When we finished, I signed my name with a steady hand, feeling lighter than I had in months. "What will you do with this?" Albert asked as he made copies. "Keep it safe," I answered. That evening, back in my cottage, I carefully cut open the edge of my mattress where the fabric had already started to fray. I slipped the will deep inside, between layers of yellowing foam, then stitched the opening closed with fishing line I'd found in a kitchen drawer. Not the most secure vault, perhaps, but good enough for now. As I worked, my phone, a prepaid one I'd purchased in town, lit up with a notification. 3 text messages from Jenna, sent to my old number but forwarded by the phone company. "Dad, we need to talk. Please call me back. I'm worried about you. I'm sorry if I was harsh. Let's have dinner and discuss everything." The words blurred before my eyes. False words. Empty words. I knew my daughter well enough to recognize when she wanted something. And right now, she wanted to find me. Not because she missed me, but because something had gone wrong in her perfect plan. I deleted the messages without responding, then sat on my porch as the sun set over Cape May. The accordion rested heavy on my lap, but I couldn't bring myself to play. Instead, I watched shadows lengthen across my small yard, thinking about the strange turns life takes when you least expect them. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Becca stood at the bottom of my porch steps, a grocery bag in one hand and Jacob's small fingers clutched in the other. "Dinner," she announced simply. "Hope you like chili." I smiled, motioning them up. "Best offer I've had all day." Jacob broke away from his mother and ran to me, pulling something from his pocket, a smooth stone with flecks of mica that caught the fading light. "For your collection," he said quietly. I had no collection, but in that moment, I decided to start one. Later, after Jacob had fallen asleep on my sofa, and Becca and I sat drinking coffee that was more milk than caffeine, she asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you hiding from someone, Richard?" The night air suddenly felt colder. "What makes you say that?" She smiled sadly. "Takes one to know one." I could have lied. Should have, probably. But something in her eyes, the same wariness I saw in my own reflection, made honesty feel like the only option. "My daughter," I admitted. "She decided I was inconvenient." Becca nodded, unsurprised. "Family can be the cruelest betrayal." "And you?" I asked, though I had no right to her secrets. She stared into her cup for a long moment. "Jacob's father," she finally said. "He's persistent." The way she said it told me everything I needed to know. Some men don't take no for an answer, even with restraining orders and state lines between them. We sat in companionable silence after that, two people adrift but momentarily anchored by circumstance and chili and the soft sounds of a sleeping child. I didn't tell her about the will hidden in my mattress. Some gifts are better left as surprises. But as they prepared to leave, Jacob sleepy-eyed and yawning, I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced since buying the cottage. I had made the right decision. What I didn't know, couldn't have known, was that my past was already catching up with me, traveling down the coast in the form of a silver BMW with New York plates and a very determined driver behind the wheel. I was fixing a loose floorboard on my porch. The constant salt air had warped the wood beyond recognition when I saw the silver BMW crawling down the street like a predator. Even before it parked across from my cottage, I knew. Some primal instinct, the same one that warns animals of approaching storms, sent electricity down my spine. Jenna had found me. She emerged from the car wearing designer sunglasses and a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my pension. Her hair was styled differently, shorter, more severe, but her posture was unmistakable. Back straight, chin tilted slightly upward, the stance of someone who had never truly known hunger or fear or rejection. Until now, perhaps, because something about her seemed off. The confident stride was missing. In its place was a hesitancy I'd never associated with my daughter. I stayed where I was, hammer in hand, and watched her approach. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain impassive. She didn't deserve to know how much her presence affected me. "Dad," she said, removing her sunglasses. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Have you now?" I replied, driving another nail into the board. The sharp crack of metal against metal was satisfying in a way I couldn't explain. She glanced at the cottage, taking in the peeling paint and weathered siding. Her nose wrinkled slightly. "You're living here, in this place?" "It's called a home," I said evenly. "Something you seemed eager to deprive me of." Jenna flinched as if I'd raised the hammer to her instead of the nail. "Dad, please. I was upset that day. I said things I didn't mean." "Did you mean it when you had me sign over the house?" The question came out harder than I intended, but I didn't regret it. "Did you mean it when you called me a burden?" She looked down, her carefully manicured fingers twisting together. "I was wrong. I see that now. Please, can I come in? We need to talk." Part of me, the part that had rocked her to sleep during thunderstorms and taught her to ride a bicycle, wanted to say yes. But the fresh wound of her betrayal hadn't healed, and I wasn't ready to expose it to the air. "No," I said simply. "I don't think we do." Her composure cracked then, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Everything's falling apart and I need you. Please." Those last words, "I need you," would have melted my resolve just months ago. But now they only reinforced what I already knew. She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here because she needed something. "You can stay at the Blue Crab Inn on Harbor Street," I told her, turning back to my work. "We can talk tomorrow, maybe." She hesitated, clearly thrown by my refusal, then retreated to her car. As she drove away, I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake listening to the distant crash of waves and wondering if I'd made the right choice. The cottage felt smaller somehow, as if Jenna's brief presence had shrunk its walls. Morning came with a knock at my door. I expected Jenna, but instead found Becca, a grocery bag in her arms and concern in her eyes. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she observed, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Our relationship had evolved to that comfortable point where formalities seemed unnecessary. "Something like that," I admitted, taking the bag from her. Inside were fresh bagels and a container of cream cheese, a luxury in my simple new life. "The woman in the fancy car?" Becca asked, filling my kettle and setting it on the stove as if it were her own kitchen. "The one who was asking questions at Miller's Market yesterday?" I nearly dropped the bagels. "What questions?" Becca shrugged, but there was tension in the gesture. "About you, where you live, how long you've been here, if you live alone." A chill ran through me despite the morning sun streaming through my windows. "What did they tell her?" "Nothing useful," Becca said with a small, satisfied smile. "People around here are protective of their own, and you're one of us now, whether you realize it or not." The kettle whistled and we settled into our routine of morning coffee and quiet conversation. I should have felt comforted by Becca's words, by the knowledge that the town had somehow accepted me as one of their own. Instead, anxiety gnawed at my insides. "She's my daughter," I finally said. "Jenna." Becca's eyes widened slightly. "The one who—" "Yes," I interrupted, not wanting to hear the words again. "That one." She considered this, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "What does she want?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But it's not me. Not really." Later that day, I was at the local hardware store buying supplies to fix a leaky faucet when Mrs. Daniels, the owner's wife, cornered me between the pipe fittings and the wood screws. "That daughter of yours," she said without preamble, her voice low despite the empty store. "She's been asking all sorts of questions about your bank, your lawyer, even if you had life insurance." The pipe fitting in my hand suddenly felt cold. "She asked about my life insurance?" Mrs. Daniels nodded, her gray curls bouncing with the movement. "Said she was worried about making sure you were properly covered. I told her we don't discuss those kinds of things with strangers around here." "Thank you," I said, truly grateful for the small-town suspicion of outsiders that had protected my privacy. "Just watch yourself," she warned. "That girl's got hunger in her eyes and it ain't for reconciliation." The words followed me home like a shadow. Hunger in her eyes. Not for reconciliation. For what then? The money she thought I might have? The cottage, humble as it was? Or something else entirely? I was still pondering this when Jenna appeared on my doorstep again, this time with a peace offering. A bottle of my favorite whiskey and a forced smile. "Can we talk now?" she asked. "Please?" I let her in, more out of curiosity than forgiveness. She settled onto my threadbare sofa, looking out of place in her expensive clothes and perfect makeup. "This is quaint," she said, glancing around. "Very you." "What do you want, Jenna?" I asked, too tired for pleasantries. She took a deep breath. "I made a mistake, Dad. A terrible mistake. I was stressed about work, about Mark, about everything. I took it out on you and I'm sorry. You threw me out of my own home," I reminded her. "The home I built with your mother." "I know," she whispered, looking down. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but maybe we could start over. You could come home." Home. The word hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning and memory. "This is my home now," I said firmly. She bit her lip, and for a moment, I saw the little girl who used to climb into my lap after skinning her knee. Then her expression shifted, hardened just slightly. "At least let me help you," she pressed. "Financially, I mean. This place is, well, it needs work, and your retirement can't be stretching very far." Ah, there it was, the real reason for her visit. "I'm doing fine," I said carefully, "but the money from the house sale could make your life so much more comfortable," she insisted. "We could set up a trust, make sure you're taken care of." I almost laughed. She didn't know about the account, the real college fund I'd used to buy this cottage outright. She thought I was living on my pension alone, struggling to make ends meet. "I don't need your help," I told her. Frustration flashed across her face before she could mask it. "Dad, be reasonable. You're not getting any younger. What if you get sick? What if—" A knock at the door interrupted her, and I silently thanked whatever deity might be listening. Becca stood there, Jacob at her side, both carrying fishing poles. "Ready for that lesson you promised?" Becca asked, then noticed Jenna. "Oh, I'm sorry. We can come back later." "No," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "We were just finishing up." Jenna's eyes narrowed as she assessed Becca, taking in the practical clothes, the scar, the rough hands of someone who worked for a living. "I didn't realize you had friends here," she said, the last word carrying a hint of something unpleasant. "This is Becca and Jacob," I said, deliberately not explaining further. "Becca, Jacob, this is Jenna, my daughter." Jacob stepped closer to his mother, sensing the tension that had filled the room. "She seems awfully comfortable here," Jenna observed after they'd left, her voice sharp with something that might have been jealousy. "How long have you known her?" "Long enough," I replied. Jenna stayed for another hour, asking probing questions that I deflected with practiced ease. Where did I keep my important papers? Had I updated my will since moving? Was I planning to sell my old furniture from the house? Each question revealed her true intentions more clearly than the last. When she finally left, promising to return the next day, I sat alone in my quiet cottage and faced a difficult truth. The daughter I had raised was gone. In her place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a means to an end. That night I added an extra lock to my door. Not because I feared violence, but because I feared what might disappear if I didn't. The rain had been falling steadily since dawn, drumming against my cottage roof with a persistence that matched my unease. Cape May in November turned moody. The tourists long gone, the beaches empty save for a few determined seagulls, and the sky a permanent shade of steel gray that bled into the horizon where ocean met clouds. I was teaching Jacob how to play "You Are My Sunshine" on the accordion, his small fingers struggling with the buttons while Becca chopped vegetables for soup in my tiny kitchen. We'd fallen into a routine of sorts, the three of us. Not a family, not exactly, but something close enough that it eased the ache of what I'd lost. "Like this?" Jacob asked, pressing the keys with intense concentration. The melody came out wobbly, but recognizable. "Perfect," I lied, and his face lit up with a rare smile. Behind him, Becca caught my eye and mouthed a silent thank you that warmed something inside me that had been cold for too long. The knock, when it came, was so forceful that we all jumped. 3 sharp raps that cut through the music and the rain and the comfortable quiet we'd built. Becca's knife stilled. Expecting someone? I wasn't. Jenna had returned to New York 3 days ago, after a week of increasingly frustrated attempts to discover my financial situation. I'd maintained my boundaries and eventually she'd run out of excuses to stay. "Maybe it's Mrs. Calloway with those muffins she promised," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Mrs. Calloway, my elderly neighbor, never ventured out in rain like this, and she certainly didn't knock like she was serving a warrant. I opened the door to find 2 men standing on my porch, rain dripping from their coats. The first wore an expensive suit beneath his raincoat, his leather briefcase protected by a plastic cover. A lawyer, if I had to guess. The second man wore a uniform, Cape May Police Department, and an expression of professional detachment. "Richard Harrison?" the suited man asked, producing a business card. "I'm Thomas Whitaker, attorney at law. This is Officer Peterson. May we come in? We have some matters to discuss." My mouth went dry. Behind me, I heard Becca set down her knife with deliberate care. "What kind of matters?" I asked, not moving from the doorway. "It concerns your daughter, Jenna Harrison," Officer Peterson said, "and a Mark Donovan. We have some questions that might be easier to discuss inside, sir." Mark, Jenna's boyfriend or fiancé, depending on which version of the story she was telling that week. I'd met him twice, both times finding him charming in that practiced way of salesmen and politicians. He managed investments, drove a car worth more than my annual pension, and called me Pops despite my visible wincing. I stepped aside to let them in, trying to ignore the cold dread pooling in my stomach. The men entered, their presence immediately filling my small living room. Jacob pressed himself against Becca's side, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "This is my neighbor Becca and her son," I explained, though neither man had asked. They were just leaving. Becca's eyes met mine, questioning. I nodded slightly and she gathered Jacob's coat. "We'll finish the lesson tomorrow," she told him, her voice deliberately light. "Say goodbye to Mr. Richard." Jacob looked up at me, worry creasing his young forehead. "Are you in trouble?" The question hung in the air, painfully direct in the way that only children can manage. "No," I assured him, ruffling his hair. "Just some grown-up business. I'll see you tomorrow." After they left, I offered the men coffee that they declined. and we settled into an uncomfortable triangle. Me in my armchair, the lawyer on the sofa, and Officer Peterson standing by the window as if guarding against escape. "Mr. Harrison," Whitaker began, opening his briefcase, "I understand you've recently been in contact with your daughter after relocating from your previous residence." "She found me," I corrected. I wasn't hiding. The lie felt stiff on my tongue. Of course I had been hiding. That was the whole point. "Be that as it may," he continued, "are you aware of your daughter's current situation?" I shook my head. "We're not exactly on speaking terms." Whitaker exchanged a glance with the officer. "Mr. Harrison, Jenna Harrison and Mark Donovan are currently under investigation for financial irregularities at the Donovan Foundation, where Mr. Donovan served as CEO and your daughter as Director of Development." The words took a moment to penetrate. Financial irregularities. A polite way of saying theft, fraud, embezzlement, the sort of crimes that came with significant jail time. "What does this have to do with me?" I asked, though I was beginning to see the outline of it, like a ship appearing through fog. "We believe they've been using shell companies to funnel donations meant for children's cancer research into personal accounts," Officer Peterson said, his tone matter of fact. "Approximately $4 million over 3 years. The number struck me like a physical blow. $4 million. While I'd been eating generic cereal and darning socks to save for Jenna's future, she'd been stealing from sick children. And now they're attempting to liquidate assets and transfer funds before the investigation concludes," Whitaker added, "including properties and accounts possibly connected to you." "I have nothing to do with any of this," I said firmly. "We understand that, sir," Officer Peterson assured me. "But your daughter has been making inquiries about your financial status, your property here, and any accounts you might have. She's also filed paperwork claiming you're mentally incompetent and that she should be granted power of attorney." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Power of attorney. The final theft, not just of my money, but of my autonomy, my very personhood. "She can't do that," I said, hearing the tremor in my voice. "I'm perfectly competent." "The petition was denied," Whitaker said, "but it shows intent. We believe she may have come here not just to locate any assets you possess, but to potentially involve you in their scheme, perhaps by having you sign documents or transfer funds." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Jenna's sudden appearance, her questions about my finances, her insistence that she wanted to help me manage my money. It hadn't been guilt or reconciliation driving her. It had been desperation. "I didn't sign anything," I said, "and I don't have much for her to take anyway." Officer Peterson nodded, his expression softening slightly. "That's good to hear, sir. Still, we'd advise caution. Don't sign any documents she presents. Don't agree to any financial arrangements, and please contact us immediately if she returns." They left me with business cards, reassurances, and a hollow feeling that expanded to fill my entire cottage. Outside, the rain continued to fall, heavier now, matching the weight that had settled over me. I sat alone in my chair long after they'd gone, staring at the accordion abandoned on the sofa where Jacob had left it. The instrument seemed to stare back, its keys silent witnesses to the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. My daughter, my only child, wasn't just selfish or cruel. She was a criminal, a thief who stole from the most vulnerable, and she'd been planning to use me as either an accomplice or a final victim. The knock that came later was gentle, hesitant. Becca stood on the porch, rain-soaked and worried. "Jacob's with Mrs. Calloway," she said. "I wanted to check on you." I must have looked as devastated as I felt because she didn't wait for an invitation. She simply stepped inside, closed the door against the storm, and sat beside me. "Want to talk about it?" she asked. "Not really," I replied. She nodded, respecting the boundary. After a moment, she asked, "Want to not talk about it together then?" Something broke inside me, not with a crash, but with the quiet surrender of ice thawing. I told her everything. Jenna's crimes, her attempt to declare me incompetent, the terrible knowledge that my own child had seen me as nothing more than a resource to be drained. When I finished, Becca took my weathered hand in hers. "I'm sorry," she said simply. And then, with the directness I'd come to expect from her, "Will she hurt you, Richard, physically, I mean?" The question startled me. "No, I don't think so." Becca's eyes, fixed on mine, held a knowledge born of experience. People do desperate things when cornered, and she sounds cornered. That night, after Becca left, I lay awake listening to the storm, and a new fear that had nothing to do with financial fraud. For the first time, I wondered if the locks on my doors were strong enough, if the windows were secure, if the distance I'd put between my old life and new was sufficient. And in the darkest part of night, a child's question echoed in my mind. Are you in trouble? I was beginning to think the answer might be yes. 2 days after the visit from the lawyer and police officer, I found myself walking along the beach at sunrise. Sleep had become elusive, my mind too full of betrayal and questions to find rest. The morning air was biting cold, the kind that makes your lungs ache with each breath, but I welcomed it. Pain meant I was still alive, still moving forward despite everything. The beach was deserted except for a lone figure in the distance standing at the water's edge. As I drew closer, I recognized Becca's silhouette against the pale pink horizon. She wore an oversized fisherman's sweater and jeans rolled up to her calves, her feet bare despite the November chill. The ocean lapped at her ankles, but she didn't seem to notice the cold. Early riser? I called as I approached. She turned, unsurprised by my presence, as if she'd been expecting me. Never really slept, she admitted. Too much on my mind. I nodded, understanding completely. Makes two of us. We stood side by side watching the sun climb higher, painting the clouds in shades of gold and coral. Neither of us spoke for a long time, content in the shared silence that had become a hallmark of our strange friendship. I need to tell you something, Becca finally said, her voice almost lost beneath the sound of breaking waves. Something I should have told you weeks ago. My heart stumbled in its rhythm. After Jenna's betrayal and the revelations about her crimes, I wasn't sure I could handle another shock. But I nodded, bracing myself. Let's walk, she suggested. We moved along the shoreline, leaving parallel footprints in the wet sand that were quickly erased by the incoming tide. Becca kept her eyes fixed on the horizon as if drawing strength from its vastness. I'm not just the woman who delivers groceries, she began, her words careful, measured. Jacob is my son, yes, but his father was your brother. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I stopped walking, my mind struggling to process her words. My brother? Thomas? Becca nodded, finally meeting my gaze. We met in Philadelphia, at a bookstore where I worked. He was giving a lecture on his latest architecture book. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, just a weekend. But then Jacob came along. Thomas, my younger brother by 4 years. Brilliant, charming, restless Thomas who had died in a car accident 6 years ago. The architect whose buildings dotted skylines across America, whose success had always been tinged with a recklessness that worried our parents. The brother I'd loved fiercely despite our differences. Thomas never knew about Jacob, Becca continued, her voice softening. I found out I was pregnant after he'd already left town. I tried to contact him once, but she shrugged, a gesture laden with old resignation. His assistant said he was engaged to some socialite. It didn't seem right to complicate his life. I stared at her, seeing my brother's features in her son's face for the first time. The high forehead, the slight cleft in the chin, the way his eyebrows pulled together when he concentrated. How had I missed it? After Thomas died, Becca went on, I saw his obituary. There was a photo of your family. You, your wife, your daughter. I kept it. Told Jacob stories about his father's family, especially about his Uncle Richard, who played the accordion and built houses with his bare hands. My throat tightened. Those weren't exactly accurate stories. A small smile touched her lips. Maybe I embellished a little. I wanted him to have heroes. We resumed walking, my mind whirling with implications. Jacob wasn't just a neighborhood boy I'd grown fond of. He was my nephew, my blood, the last living connection to my brother. Why did you come looking for me? I asked, the question that had been hovering at the edges of our relationship finally finding voice. Becca's eyes, the color of sea glass, held mine steadily. It wasn't pity, if that's what you're thinking. It was gratitude, I guess. Thomas talked about you, how you were always the steady one, the one who held everything together. When Jacob started asking more questions about his dad's family, I thought maybe you could give him something I couldn't. A male role model? I suggested. She shook her head. Roots, history, a sense that he belongs to something bigger than just me and him against the world. We reached a cluster of rocks where the beach curved, forming a natural barrier. Becca sat down, patting the space beside her. I joined her, feeling the cold stone through my thin pants. "I never meant to deceive you," she said. "I was waiting for the right moment, but then your daughter showed up and everything got complicated and—" She trailed off, gesturing helplessly. "And here we are," I finished for her. "Here we are," she echoed. The sun had fully risen now, burning away the morning mist and revealing the vast stretch of ocean before us. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, lay the life I'd left behind. The house Jenna had taken, the community that had been my world for decades, the grave where Margaret rested. "I don't want anything from you," Becca said suddenly, fiercely. "That's important for you to know. I didn't come looking for money or inheritance or whatever else you might be thinking. Jacob and I have managed on our own for 8 years. We'll keep managing." The vehemence in her voice made me realize she was afraid. Afraid I would think she was like Jenna, using family connections for personal gain. "I know," I assured her. That thought never crossed my mind. She searched my face, looking for any sign of doubt or reservation. Finding none, her shoulders relaxed slightly. "What will you tell Jacob?" I asked. "The truth," she replied without hesitation. "That you're his uncle, that his father was your brother. That family is complicated but important." I nodded, appreciating her directness. "And what about the other part of your story? The part you haven't told me?" Becca stiffened. "What do you mean?" "The letters in my oven," I said gently. "The late-night phone calls that make you cry. The reason you chose Cape May, of all places, to start over." Her hand unconsciously moved to the scar on her face, tracing its jagged path. "You've been paying attention." "I'm old, not blind," I replied. "And I recognize someone running when I see them. Takes one to know one, as you said yourself." Becca was silent for so long I thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, stripped of emotion. The voice of someone who had told this story too many times to too many officials. "His name is Eric. Jacob's stepfather, technically, though they were never close. We were married for 3 years. The first year was good. The second year was complicated. The third year was hell." She didn't need to elaborate. The scar on her face told part of the story. The fear that sometimes flickered in Jacob's eyes told the rest. I got away, got a restraining order, moved 4 times in 2 years because he kept finding us. The letters come from prison. He got 18 months for violating the restraining order and assaulting me in front of Jacob. He gets out in 4 months. The simple mathematics of fear. 4 months until her past caught up with her. 4 months of safety remaining. "The prison isn't supposed to forward his letters," she continued, "but somehow they keep coming. Always the same message, that he'll find us, that we belong to him, that running only makes him angrier." I thought of the small cottage by the sea that had become my sanctuary, the new will hidden in my mattress, the unexpected family I'd found in the ruins of the old one. And I thought of Becca and Jacob, carrying their own wounds, fighting their own battles. In that moment, sitting on cold rocks with the Atlantic stretching before us, I made a decision that felt like coming home after a long journey. "He won't find you," I said with quiet certainty. "And if he does, he'll have to go through me first." Becca looked at me, really looked at me, as if seeing past the aging exterior to the core of who I was, who I had always been beneath the disappointments and betrayals. "You barely know us," she whispered. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in months. "I know enough. I know your family." That morning on the beach, with the confession hanging in the salt air between us, I realized that family isn't always what you're born into. Sometimes it's what you build from the wreckage when everything else has been swept away. The first real snowfall of winter dusted Cape May in a fine powder that clung to the eaves of my cottage and transformed the beach into a vast, white canvas. I'd been living in my seaside refuge for nearly 3 months, long enough to patch most of the leaks in the roof, replace the worst of the rotting floorboards, and begin to think of it as home. Jacob had his own drawer in the kitchen where he kept his colored pencils and half-finished drawings. Becca had a spare key that she used without ceremony, often arriving with groceries or fresh fish from the local market. We had fallen into a rhythm, the 3 of us. Not the family I'd expected to have in my twilight years, but precious nonetheless. The knock that disrupted our makeshift peace came on a Tuesday morning, heavy and insistent. I was alone, Becca having taken Jacob to a doctor's appointment in the next town over. Through the frosted window, I could make out Jenna's silhouette on my porch, accompanied by a man I didn't recognize. My first instinct was not to answer, to pretend I wasn't home. But the knowledge that she would simply return another day, perhaps when Jacob and Becca were present, pushed me to the door. "Dad," Jenna said as I opened it, her voice honey-sweet in a way that immediately set off warning bells. "We need to talk." The man beside her, tall with slicked back hair and a suit too thin for the weather, extended his hand. "Gerald Winters, Mr. Harrison. I'm your daughter's attorney." An attorney, of course. I stepped aside to let them enter, noting how Jenna's gaze swept critically over my modest living room, the mismatched furniture, the patched curtains, the accordion propped in the corner, looking for assets to seize, no doubt. "What brings you here, Jenna?" I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Last I heard you were having some legal troubles of your own." Her smile tightened at the reference to her fraud case. "That's being handled. I'm here about you, Dad, about your situation." "My situation seems just fine to me," I replied, remaining standing though they had seated themselves on my sofa. Standing gave me a small advantage, a sense of control I desperately needed. Gerald Winters cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrison, your daughter has expressed concerns about your living conditions and your associations here in Cape May." "Associations?" I repeated. "That woman and her son," Jenna clarified, her distaste evident. "They seem to have inserted themselves quite thoroughly into your life." I felt heat rise in my face. "Becca and Jacob are my family." Jenna's eyebrows shot up. "Family? Dad, you've known them for what? A few months? I'm your family. Your only family." The irony of her claiming family ties after trying to declare me mentally incompetent wasn't lost on me. "What do you want, Jenna?" "Really?" She exchanged a glance with her lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. "I found something in your bedroom the last time I was here," she said, reaching into her designer handbag. "Something I think we need to discuss." From her bag, she withdrew a familiar document. My will. The one I'd hidden inside my mattress, stitched carefully into the foam. The one that left everything to Jacob with Becca as executor. The paper was wrinkled and stained, as if it had been handled many times since she'd found it. "You went through my personal belongings," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You cut open my mattress." Jenna didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "I was concerned about your mental state. And clearly," she waved the document, "I was right to be worried. This is proof that you're not thinking clearly." Gerald Winters leaned forward. "Mr. Harrison, leaving your entire estate to a child you barely know suggests undue influence, possibly even elder abuse. It's our duty to protect you from those who would take advantage of your vulnerable position." The cool calculation behind their concern made my stomach turn. "I'm not vulnerable," I said, "and no one is taking advantage of me. I made that decision with a clear mind and full understanding of what I was doing." "Dad," Jenna's voice took on the patronizing tone I'd come to despise, "you were upset with me. I understand that. But disinheriting your only daughter in favor of strangers? That's not rational." "Perhaps not," I conceded. "But neither was throwing me out of my own home and trying to have me declared incompetent so you could access my accounts." Her face flushed. "That was a misunderstanding." "Was it also a misunderstanding when you stole from a children's cancer charity?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, cutting through the pretense between us. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Gerald Winters shifted uncomfortably, clearly not prepared for this direct confrontation. "I want that document invalidated," Jenna finally said, abandoning the concerned daughter act. "I want what's rightfully mine." "It's not rightfully yours," I replied. "It never was. Everything I have, I earned, and I get to decide where it goes when I'm gone." "We'll contest it," her lawyer warned, "on grounds of diminished capacity and undue influence. It'll be messy, public." "Then contest it," I said, finding strength in my resolve. "But not in my home. We're done here." Jenna's face hardened into something ugly and familiar, the same expression she'd worn when evicting me months ago. "This isn't over, Dad. I'm not letting some random woman and her kid take what belongs to me." Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Becca and Jacob entered, bringing with them a gust of cold air and the lingering scent of snow. They froze in the doorway, immediately sensing the hostile atmosphere. "We can come back," Becca started to say, but I shook my head. "No, stay. We were just finishing up." I looked pointedly at Jenna and her lawyer. "Weren't we?" Gerald Winters stood, clearly eager to escape the tension. Jenna remained seated, her eyes fixed on Becca with undisguised hostility. "So this is her," she said. "The one who's convinced you to cut out your own daughter." Becca's hand tightened on Jacob's shoulder, pulling him slightly behind her in a protective gesture that spoke volumes. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said calmly. "Don't play innocent," Jenna spat. "I know what you're after. His money, his house. You've got him wrapped around your finger, don't you? What did you do, seduce him? Promise him companionship in his old age?" Jacob's eyes widened at the venom in Jenna's voice. I saw fear flash across his face, the same fear I imagined he'd felt when his stepfather turned violent. "That's enough," I said, my voice low but firm. "You need to leave. Now." Jenna stood, clutching the will in her fist. "This isn't valid," she insisted. "No court will uphold it." "We'll see about that," I replied. "But in the meantime, I'd like you to leave." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "You know, when I told you that you'd die alone in a nursing home, I meant it. And that's still where you're headed. Except now it'll be a state facility with no visitors, I'll make sure of it." The door slammed behind her with enough force to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Jacob's small voice broke through my anger. "Is she going to take you away?" he asked, fear making his words tremble. I knelt down to his level, despite the protest from my aging knees. "No, buddy. No one's taking me anywhere." "She was yelling," he persisted, like Eric used to yell before. Becca and I exchanged a glance over his head, shared understanding passing between us. We both knew how violence began. With words, with threats, with the belief that you owned another person. "I need to call Albert," I said, referring to my lawyer. "And probably Officer Peterson, too. They should know Jenna's back in town." Becca nodded, guiding Jacob to the kitchen. "I'll make some tea. This might be a long afternoon." Later, after calls had been made and Jacob had been settled with his drawing supplies, Becca and I sat on the porch despite the cold, watching snowflakes drift lazily onto the beach. "She'll be back," Becca said. Not a question, but a certainty. "Yes," I agreed. "With more lawyers, more threats." "Are you sure about the will?" she asked quietly. "It's not too late to change it, to avoid all this." I turned to look at her. This woman who had come into my life unexpectedly and become as essential as the tide. Jacob is Thomas's son, my nephew, my blood. Even if he weren't, even if you were just the kind neighbors who brought soup and company, I'd still rather leave everything to him than to someone who sees me as nothing but a resource to be drained. Becca's eyes glistened in the winter light. "She's still your daughter." "Yes," I acknowledged, the word heavy with sadness. "But sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we're born with." Inside, Jacob was humming softly as he drew, a melody I recognized from our accordion lessons. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering tracks and softening edges. And somewhere in town, Jenna was plotting her next move, convinced that blood entitled her to everything I'd built. What she didn't understand, what she had never understood, was that inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about values, about honor, about the kind of person you choose to be when faced with hardship. And by that measure, she had already disinherited herself long ago. Winter in Cape May stretched on like a held breath, days blurring into weeks as January surrendered to February. The tourists were long gone, leaving the small coastal town to those who called it home year-round. My cottage had weathered the worst of the season's storms, though the wind still found ways to whistle through cracks I hadn't yet sealed. I didn't mind. The imperfections made it feel more like a living thing, something with character, with history. After Jenna's confrontation over the will, I'd braced myself for a legal assault. Albert, my lawyer, had prepared counter-arguments against claims of incompetence or undue influence. Officer Peterson kept an eye on my property during his patrols, wary of Jenna's desperation as her own legal troubles mounted. The Cape May community closed ranks around us, Mrs. Calloway bringing extra casseroles, Walter from the taxi service checking in with transparent excuses, even the postman lingering to ensure I was doing well. But Jenna never returned. No legal notices arrived. No further threats materialized. The silence was almost more unnerving than confrontation would have been. "Maybe she's given up," Becca suggested one evening as we watched Jacob build an elaborate structure from driftwood on the living room floor. The boy had discovered an aptitude for design that reminded me painfully of Thomas, the way he could visualize spaces, the careful attention to balance and proportion. "Jenna doesn't give up," I replied, keeping my voice low so Jacob wouldn't hear. "She regroups. finds another angle. February melted into March. The first crocuses pushed through the sandy soil beside my porch steps, defiant against the lingering chill. Becca and Jacob spent more nights at my cottage than at their own apartment in town, a practical arrangement we explained as saving heating costs, though we all knew it was more than that. We had become a family, unconventional but no less real for it. I was tending to those brave crocuses one morning, carefully clearing debris from around their purple blooms, when I noticed an envelope beneath the welcome mat. No postmark, no stamp, hand-delivered. My name was written in Jenna's unmistakable sharp penmanship. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. It wasn't a legal document, too thin, too informal. With a sense of foreboding, I opened it at my kitchen table. Inside was a sonogram image, the grainy black and white kind that expectant parents proudly display on refrigerators. Beneath it, a brief note in the same angular handwriting. Dad, maybe I'll never understand what I lost, but I want my son to know the man you are. If there's still room someday, I want to come back. Jenna. I stared at the image, trying to make sense of the shifting contours that supposedly represented my grandchild. A boy, Jenna had written. My grandson. The continuation of a bloodline I'd thought severed by betrayal and disappointment. I didn't cry. The emotion that washed over me was too complex for simple tears. A mixture of suspicion, wonder, regret, and a cautious, hesitant hope that refused to be extinguished despite everything that had happened between us. Becca found me still sitting there an hour later when she arrived with groceries. One look at my face told her something had changed. What is it? She asked, setting down her bags. Wordlessly, I handed her the envelope. She examined the sonogram and note, her expression carefully neutral. Do you believe her? She finally asked. It was the right question, not whether I was happy or what I planned to do, but whether the gesture was genuine. Becca, who had her own history with manipulation and false promises, understood the stakes. I don't know, I admitted. It could be another tactic, a new approach since threats didn't work. Becca sat across from me, her hands folded on the table. What does your gut tell you? I considered the question, trying to separate decades of paternal love from recent pain and betrayal. That she's desperate, that she's facing jail time and financial ruin, that she's scared. I paused, the next words difficult to form, but also that she might be pregnant, and that even Jenna wouldn't use an unborn child as a mere pawn. Becca nodded, understanding the complicated calculus of family loyalty. What will you do? Nothing, I decided after a moment. Not yet. If she's sincere, she'll try again. If she's manipulating me, responding will only encourage her. Jacob came home from school later that afternoon, bursting through the door with the exuberance of a child who has survived another day of sitting still and following rules. He dropped his backpack by the door, despite our constant reminders to hang it up, and presented me with a lumpy package wrapped in construction paper. Made it in art class, he announced proudly. For you, Pop. Pop. He'd started calling me that a few weeks earlier, the nickname emerging naturally without discussion or declaration. Each time I heard it, something warmed inside my chest. I unwrapped the package carefully, preserving the paper covered in dinosaur drawings. Inside was a clay disc, unevenly shaped but clearly made with great concentration. Pressed into its surface were Jacob's handprints, his name scratched beneath them in wobbly letters. It's for your door, he explained, like a sign that says this is our home. Our home. Not my cottage or your place, but our home. I looked up to find Becca watching us, her eyes soft with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It's perfect, I told him, my voice rough with feeling. Best door plate I've ever seen. That evening, as the sun set over the Atlantic, casting long golden fingers across the water, the three of us sat on the beach with a picnic dinner of sandwiches and apple pie. Jacob had fallen asleep between us, exhausted from building an elaborate sandcastle complete with moat and drawbridge. What if she's telling the truth? Becca asked quietly, continuing our earlier conversation as if there had been no interruption. About the baby, about wanting to come back. I watched the waves roll in, constant and unchanging despite the chaos of human lives playing out on their shores. Then I'll have to find a way to forgive her, I said. Not for her sake, but for the child's. And for mine. Becca's hand found mine in the sand. A brief touch of solidarity. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, she reminded me. Or putting yourself at risk again. I know, I assured her. Whatever happens with Jenna, it doesn't change this. I gestured to encompass the three of us, the cottage visible on the dune behind us, the life we were carefully building together. This is real. This is family. As if sensing he was being discussed, Jacob stirred slightly, murmuring in his sleep. Becca smoothed his hair with a mother's instinctive tenderness. "When Eric gets out next month," she said, her voice barely audible above the waves, "we might need to move again. Somewhere farther this time. Maybe the West Coast." The thought of them leaving created a physical ache in my chest. "Or we could stay and face him together," I suggested. "This town protects its own, and I'm too old to start over again." She didn't answer immediately, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where sky met water in a blurred line of deepening blue. "We'll see," she finally said, neither a rejection nor an acceptance. Later that night, after Jacob had been tucked into the small bedroom that had unofficially become his, and Becca had retreated to the guest room she now occupied more often than not, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and the sonogram. I thought about legacy, not the kind measured in bank accounts or property deeds, but in lessons taught, in kindness shown, in the quiet courage of beginning again when everything has been lost. I thought about the grandchild I might never know and the nephew sleeping soundly under my roof. I thought about Jenna, whose heart I once knew better than my own, now a stranger making overtures I couldn't fully trust. But mostly I thought about how life rarely gives us the family we expect. But sometimes, if we're very lucky, it gives us the family we need. The sonogram went into a drawer in my bedside table. Not displayed, not discarded. A possibility, nothing more. The future would reveal itself in its own time, and I had learned at last to be patient with its unfolding. Life often teaches us its most profound lessons through our deepest wounds. When my own daughter betrayed me and left me with nothing, I discovered that family isn't always defined by blood, but by those who choose to stand beside you when the world turns its back. My journey from that cold park bench to finding unexpected connection with Becca and Jacob wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the dignity and love that everyone deserves in their final chapters. What would you do if the person you sacrificed everything for suddenly saw you as nothing but a burden? Would you have the courage to start over, to rebuild from ashes, to open your heart again after such profound betrayal? Sometimes the family we're born into fails us, while the family we find along the way saves us. And sometimes, as with Jenna's unexpected attempt to reconnect, life offers us second chances that come wrapped in uncertainty and past pain. The true test isn't in how well we punish those who hurt us, but in how carefully we protect the new happiness we've found. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel for more powerful stories of resilience and redemption. Like and share with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to find belonging, even after devastating loss. Remember that while we can't choose how others treat us, we always have the power to choose how we respond. And sometimes, that response can lead us to the very love and acceptance we thought was lost forever.